So, tell me more about this thing where you name your pet after you learn their personality. I've never heard of that before.
Well, so typically, it's interesting the parallel between naming a human and naming a pet because we don't give with a child, like a human child, we don't give them like we name them before we know them.
Mm-hmm.
I guess because God names us before He knows us.
Yeah.
Would be a good equation for that. But with a pet, somehow it doesn't have the same significance. So it seems like we name them after we know them.
Mm-hmm.
But we name a child before we know anything about them except that they exist. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Yeah. But it seems to mean that we're sort of, putting something on them. Um, well, I suppose if you have a Christian name, then technically it's implied that the law is within you. And if the law is not within you, then your parents put it into you, basically. Like, for example, in a Catholic baptism, the parents and the godparents will, basically pledge, uh, to raise the child in a certain way. So the thing is, it's the assertion of things not yet seen, because they realize that symbolically they're a new creation. But the thing is, if they have to be born again, then technically it's the parents and godparents' responsibility to make sure that they do go that path, right?
In the Bible, a lot of the names came out of tragedy.
Tragedy?
Yeah, like I'm trying to think. I know there were a few examples. Well, like their name, the child's name would depend on how the parent felt about them. But
Okay.
it wasn't really about the child. It was about the circumstance that created the child.
Yeah.
I can't think of any names particularly. But I know
So it's almost like what we talk about in astrology, where there's like a legacy of the combinations of planets that we're born under. But of course, that's an oversimplification of the archetypes that go into childbearing and rearing and so on and so forth. But it's interesting, that it could also potentially serve as a metaphor for different times in our lives, along a particular journey, and then so the child actually is the brainchild, if you will, the type of thought, that goes along with whatever moment you are in on a particular path. But it also suggests that, generally speaking, there's only one path, and you can't really skip steps. I mean, all the steps are there, but I have a feeling that some people do skip steps, and that they sometimes hop around between Old Testament and New Testament, depending on, their mixed, uh, you know, giftedness or developmental disabilities or whatever. But it's as if the believers are being asked to do to look at fundamental principles of everything, and then like hold them so literally that essentially one has to be skeptical about everything else. So, but the thing is, a lot of the principles that are used in decision making, it seems, um, are ad hoc decision making principles. I mean, they're not even necessarily principles as in axioms, but like, say, individual beliefs that get put in, say, by watching videos on, say, alternative news sites. And so the thing is, maybe those people know how to communicate better to say the Republican crowd, because they're giving them, say, one or two things at a time, and not overloading them with information. The problem is, I would say that the people who tend to be like overloaded with information, they have a good sense of what's going on, but the thing is, they can burn out pretty easily, and so their actual status to tell people about what's going on is nil. I mean, they can't get any degrees or anything because they can't stay focused because they're interested in too many things.
It is a question of, is there any particular skill a person could have that would allow them to naturally influence everything in a way where they can understand it with one certain skill?
Well, that's that's the thing. So it would work the same way as in theory the Bible is supposed to work. So I mean, some people who okay, so there could be people who would be poor, and then there could be people of means who would be literalists to the extreme that they would not read anything other than the Bible, even though they had other texts available to them besides the Bible from like Western history and stuff like that. So the thing is, um, so the thing is, there's a point at which one realizes that the text on the page is not sufficient for most people to grasp the full meaning on it, and then so you get into buying 5 books to understand one book, or even getting a whole college degree, or even a master's in theology, or a doctorate in theology, um, or divinity, in order to fully understand the meaning in the first book that you start with. So the thing is, I guess what I'm saying is usually all of the books that you would read after the Bible usually would refer back to the Bible if the whole idea is for you to understand that one book. And sometimes I tried to do a thought experiment and ask people, say, what if you changed the book that you used as your primary book? Would you come to completely different conclusions, or would they somewhat tie back to, say, the original understandings that you would have had you done all your learning in the knowledge lineage of the Bible, as opposed to this other book, whatever this other book might be, or document.
And of course, some people might try to shortcut with, say, reading books like 40 Laws of Power or How to Win Friends and Influence People, to try and gain that personal skill to talk to people either through manipulation or coercion, or in my case, the opposite would be.
Well, I mean, you do realize that the effect of the so-called founding fathers rebelling against the British was that they were essentially rebelling against God. I mean, they were rebelling against the known God who was embodied within the king at the time. And so the thing is, when they wrote the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, it was seen by the British as they were creating their own God, basically.
So they were more or less just worshiping their own ideas.
I suppose. Well, they were interested in self-discovery. They were interested in finding the best government system possible. And so the thing is, they still were making references to a higher power. They just didn't assume that it was the Iron Age God of Israel, because that is Israel's national God, and they didn't want to necessarily completely imitate Rome, because technically the flavor of Israel's God that was preached in Rome essentially was syncretized into sort of a more Roman kind of God. And then after the Church of England broke off from the Vatican, it would seem like the Anglicans sort of developed their own God, because it functioned differently in terms of the English cultures, I guess. And so in essence, it gave them the right to form, say, a different kind of government. Not not a strictly religious government, if you will.
I just realized something. I understand why the Bible says that
Yeah.
the love of money is the root of many evils, because hoarding money is actually hoarding potential, because you're taking away what someone else could have.
Yeah.
And if you're not spending it, you're not using it to benefit anyone else. And if you think about the heaven concept, that there won't be currency in heaven,
well,
you know.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, sometimes when I was in the MLM, they would say it's good for there to be rich people, because then they will sort of trickle down, spend their money on buying, say, a Lexus, and then that provides jobs for the people assembling the car at the Lexus manufacturing plant. I guess you could say that about a Tesla as well. So yeah, the thing is, if we didn't have rich people, they would argue that then there would be no yacht company, because there'd be no yachts bought.
I'm realizing more and more that if we actually adapted a completely socialist world, we actually probably would just do away with money entirely, because if everyone had the same amount of money, we would probably just end up going back to trading.
Oh, barter? Yeah.
Bartering, yeah.
Yeah, they were wondering if we'd go to, sort of like the Mad Max kind of situation, where everything sort of becomes a desert, and then every town, so the nomads would go between the towns. I think they were saying this on National Geographic. The nomads going between the towns would bring water to the towns, and then the towns would supply the nomads with gasoline to keep roaming around and supplying the towns, in theory.
Unless we just got rid of vehicles, went back to using camels and horses.
Yeah.
Then we could focus more on agriculture. We could farm out all the deserts. So basically all the deserts, like Sahara Desert and all that, because the Israelites figured out how to do that. And we could just get rid of all deserts and replace them with huge agriculture centers. Then we have more plants. Then we could also figure out how to redistribute water, and basically have no deserts. And then we would be able to populate those deserts with people, so that people wouldn't be starving. And then that food could be moved over to places like third world countries where they need the food.
Yeah.
But who's going to do that? Rich people don't want to do that. They want to support the So governments aren't going to do that.
Yeah.
On their own. They need someone to step in and do it for them.
Yeah.
So how would we do that? I was actually thinking we'd have to figure out a way to get rid of money.
But, well, see, one of the difficulties is that essentially, it doesn't matter how low on the totem pole, say, a business person is, because they still have to be, given certain privileges as business people. So it's assumed that essentially there is a potential nation within that person. So therefore, it's as if he's pre-entitled to the profits, from that corporation, because he would have made those profits. And of course, you see all of this speculative thinking in lawsuits, so there's so I think what I was trying to do is I was trying to explain why rich people justify their wealth. Oh yes, that's right. Corporate personhood. So the thing is, corporations act as if they're misunderstood, and as if they should have rights of humans. That life is sacred. So now corporations have essentially become sacred, and they have the right to hire lawyers and fight for their rights. They get the same rights as in the Bill of Rights, essentially, but applied not to any specific person. So essentially, it's sort of like a wolf pack mentality. If one in the corporation is attacked, then the entire corporation needs to go to war in a lawsuit, because they have sworn with their interior agreements, their social contracts, so to speak, um, from within the corporation to um, defend each other and also what's the other thing? Hold each other not liable. Yeah.
So this actually comes back to what we started talking about.
But it's almost like everybody has agreed to preach for the corporation, if you will. Sorry, go ahead.
Right. Well, I always think this actually comes back to the original point, a name, because in a way, businesses for rich people become a pet, if you think about it, because they're creating something where they can enslave people to the money that becomes.
Well, the thing is, it happens very frequently where somebody like Bill Gates, he works for Microsoft for a while, and then he leaves the board of his own company, but still has, say, 50% of the stock options, and so then and then he could basically still sort of control the company, even though he's not, on the board anymore. Because the thing is, you can sort of blackmail the boards into certain decisions if you say you own a majority of the stock, and then you could say you would sell off the stock if they don't, do what you say. But interestingly, the opposite happened with Walmart, in which a lot of the descendants of the Walton family were actually secretly letting go of all their Walmart stock because I guess it just wasn't, the same company it was when it began. But so yeah, it's like they start out wanting to be a part of something great, and then something happens to their brains when they get a certain amount of money and a certain amount of operations, and then it's focused on just maintaining those operations, maintaining those existing contracts, because it is just so much work to alter those existing contracts. I would say it works pretty much the same way with government too, which is why, generally speaking, all of these government employees being terminated and various things that government would give us money to, being terminated, um, or the programs being terminated. There's so much outcry because these are all, social contracts which we all essentially took for granted. Um, and they're very intertwined, and they've been around since maybe like the Great Depression and stuff like that. So people are saying, well, this money, and then the people who are tied to this money, well, they're far away in proximity to us, so that we don't necessarily need to consider that the lack of that money might be, hurting people's lives, and so. But the most important thing they're saying is that the laws tied to this money and these people who are tied to this money, um, the laws are way too much. Like as far as costly of mental energy to sort them out, figure which ones apply, and then build on top of like thousands upon thousands of laws that have already been created, or thousands of decisions that have been made in like the Supreme Court and stuff like that. So they're trying to like simplify everything, if you will, and um, give the sense that I don't know that they're more mature in some way, in that they've developed enough heuristics that they don't feel they need to live with that many laws.
So simplification, basically.
Well, simplification only because they're certain of themselves. They're certain that they know how the government is supposed to function without all of those extra laws and programs. I mean, that they consider to be extra, if you will.
And yet we don't have any governments that operate that way.
We don't have small government anywhere else around the world.
No, I'm not saying small government. I'm saying effective government.
Well, the thing is, small government advocates have told me that what they believe in is that government's supposed to do three main purposes: have a national currency, have a military that can conscript anybody from any state within the union, and then a postal service, and that's it. Other than those three functions, small government advocates have told me that government's not supposed to really do anything else. And so, I mean, they're not even supposed to collect taxes, really, in those kind of people's opinions. So, so the thing is, if the government stopped collecting taxes, would that mean that people would actually have a much easier time at everything that they were trying to do in life? You know,
Imagine if
I mean,
everyone just worked for the government.
I mean, assuming everybody could work. Well, yeah. I mean, that would be nice. I mean, that would be essentially sort of like a form of socialism in principle, in which, say, the government was obligated to hire everyone, and then yeah, and then of course for those people who couldn't find, say, full-time work or whatever, or couldn't afford wherever they were living, or whatever lifestyle they had, like with a car and everything, then I suppose the government would give them benefits until they found some other useful thing to do within the government. And that could have emergent properties in which, you know they would be always trying to find new ways that, say, different types of disabled people could find work.
Yeah, it's really hard to manage government because you can never really keep the corruption out. And I once heard a woman say that when I was in a friend group, this wasn't someone I knew very well. It was the fiance of a friend of a friend, or at least a girlfriend. Anyway, she said she believed that there was no corruption in government. At least she seemed to say that. She seemed to believe some form of that. She didn't seem to understand how executive order could function. She didn't seem to understand treasury corruption or mafia connections, stuff like that. She didn't seem to understand any of that stuff. So I didn't say anything to her, but I think about it. Like, yeah, I mean, there's so many things that go wrong in the government. You even have just one person in the right place or the wrong place.
Exactly, and that's what I say about discrimination too. It only takes one person in each workplace, and then basically it creates a hostile situation, because that person usually has the power to convert everybody to their hostile opinion for the vulnerable group. But yeah. So there's this sense that the self-appointed guardians of the status quo are on some kind of crusade to bring justice. The justice they feel is within themselves, but they're confusing the group sense of justice with their own sense of justice, and so they just assume that the majority of whatever group they belong to will go along with them in going after the outgroup. And in many cases that does happen. It's very popular to go against an outgroup, and frankly, I don't know why, except maybe it has to do with the majority within the bigger group, say, protecting their own self-interest, if you will. And so the self-interest is probably like sensed ahead of time. The almost paranoia of a loss, if, say, an other that looks too unfamiliar were to gain some sort of advantage, then it would be, sort of zero sum. But the idea is that, if people see with their mind's eye too easily, then they'll say, "Oh, everything is simple." That person's, a horrible person, you know, because someone else that I recognize as my own group told me so. And then, and then of course, the person who is vulnerable would like to, say something in their defense, but there's no time. A couple words in, they've already been rejected. But I mean, not just rejected, but even to the point where, say, the protective bubble around the corporate body will take up more and more space, but because they were able to buy that space, um, that supposedly wasn't officially owned, even though it sort of encroaches into, the mind space of other groups. Well, the corporate body will say, well, we rightfully have this space, and that group never had any history. That group never had any future here, and so, that that other group, just needs to, let us excel with our excellence or superiority or whatever you want to call it. But then that comes to, the decision making around, um, say, hiring, where um, where people are saying we're not actually honoring um, actual good skills or or excellence in whatever it is. You know, they're saying that academia is teaching only liberalism and not, actual in-depth subject material or whatever. And so I I tend to disagree with that only because um, there's just so much uh, cultural context, and there's been a history of a lot of cultures being essentially erased by trying to create a monocultural curriculum or monocultural understanding of things in corporations. So is it that corporations are being forced to hire, inferior employees, or is it that um, corporations just don't know how to see with their mind's eye that that they could have a decent employee on their hands, and that they are favoring groups that they can relate to because the cultural language communicates with them when they sense their own as opposed to the other. And then what confuses um, the majority group is when there's intermingling, and then it gives them dissonance because they don't know if this is self or other. And so they don't know whether or not to give the special treatment that they can't even put into words to what they'd like to perceive as the other. But it's almost as if, their mind is playing tricks on them when that's not the case.
If the latter was the case, where
Mhm.
good employees were being warned, I would assume those employees would go to make their own companies and employ people with brighter minds to make up for that loss.
Yes, except it just costs so much to do normal company work, and so you get the you got the sense that of course you have to work under other people before you can start your own thing, or you generally have to be like super overqualified for a particular type of job so that they're begging you to come back, but then you work against that energy and start your own company and basically become a competitor because their requirement was like a master degree, but if you got a PhD, then you can call the shots if you stay with them, or you can start your own company.
And I guess for a true entrepreneur who wanted to work in, say, a tech position, a company like that they didn't start might be kind of a help for them. Yeah. Or a help for the company that employs them. Because one of them will be competing against the other trying to get a better deal. Yeah. The one hiring them is trying to downplay their skill, but they themselves are trying to upplay their own skill. So they'll want to live anyway.
Oh, yeah, well, like
because they know their own potential.
Yeah, so there was a book. I forget exactly what her name was. Barbara Eisenreich or something like that. Wrote a book called Nickel and Dimed, and I think it's in its 20th anniversary or something like that. And she was saying, that people kept having to get all these new degrees and certifications and stuff like that, and then and then she would say that that it was just too hard, to keep up with all these new certifications or degrees, and that people would go into interview and then they'd be missing the new degree, the new experience, and they just keep being rebuffed for whatever job they applied for.
And you wonder, you'd think, I know that tech companies generally, like, let's say two major tech companies got into some kind of a major conflict they couldn't solve with financial suing or something.
Or like maybe that whole proprietary thing where they don't back function with each other.
Imagine if a tech war happens in this country, like two major tech firms go to war.
Well, that's the thing. They have so many times over compatibility issues. Have you noticed that when you're on an Android phone, you can't easily access non-Google stuff? And have you noticed that when you're on an iPhone, you can't easily access Google branded stuff? Or they're and then what else? There's definitely there's another company too that has conflicts with those two other companies as well. Maybe it's like streaming services and stuff like that. Okay.
I just imagine the kind of back and forth secret society hacking that could happen. Like if these firms started hiring black hat hackers to shut down other companies.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, presumably, we think that places like North Korea or China or Iran might be doing that stuff potentially. I mean, who knows? we don't know. There was also the supposition that Russian hackers were trying to interfere with the election.
Now, I think, do you feel like Barb is
and it's in a sense also these people can make a name for themselves. How many times do people? Sometimes in an attempt to gain immortality, people try to live vicariously through their children.
Yeah, I mean that essentially is the whole idea of eternal life, in that your hopes, dreams, and desires, live on in somebody else. And the thing is, there being a sense that something would have to, in essence, happen to you in order for you to get recognized posthumously, if you will, as opposed to, say, the person who just keeps having the advantage in life. They don't necessarily go anywhere.
We are having some challenges. Shelley's having some challenges with some of the cultural.
So in a way, everyone's just trying to find their identity. And it makes sense. Very few people actually know who they are, even when they think they do. Especially those people that, in a sense, try to continuously evolve. especially with intellectual stuff or other things.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not always a clear way of knowing if they're being guided by something or someone.
Mm-hmm.
So
we gotta figure out what's guiding people.
right.
So we
Yeah.
can help them with, but it has to be with the right
Yeah.
intent and with the right method and motive,
Yeah, and it's really
Mm.
which is what I'm doing with people. Be a shining light. That's what I want to do. Because at a young age, I swore I'd never be manipulated, and now manipulated.
Okay.
But I did become manipulative at a point because I reasoned that was the only reason I could stop myself from being manipulated. And knew that I was being manipulated with certain people. I'm not going to say who it was, but those people actually thought they were manipulating me, and I knew they were trying to be manipulative. And I allowed it to happen intentionally, whether I told you that or not at the time, I don't know. But I knew. And I just let it play out to see what would happen because I was trying to learn about those people, trying to see what tactics they were. It was my way of learning because if I would have resisted right away, first off, I didn't know the proper way to resist. But secondly, I wouldn't have learned anything about why they were doing it.
Yeah. So, who did you get manipulated by?
I don't want to name these people.
Well, we'll just name the type of person. Like if there were any kind of recognizable descriptors, not recognizable to tell who they were, but like recognizable in terms of, something that's like a reference point. Was it a man? Was it a woman?
Oh, there were a bunch of people.
Was it a relationship, or was it, just some sort of partnership? To do things together as friends, or was it, something else?
I mean, even when I was in St. Michael's, I was being manipulated by a therapist.
Oh yeah, tell me more about St. Michael's. You said, whatever is acceptable. To mention to the public.
I mean, that place doesn't even exist anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but the thing is, like, do documents still exist? That would say what kind of abuses were in that place.
I mean, they made us watch White Oleander and Pay It Forward. Those are the two movies I remember, and that was required viewing.
Yeah, but the thing is, you said there were court cases that actually had determined that place was unsuitable or whatever.
I don't know if you'd call them court cases. It was just meetings with my dad.
Oh, okay.
With the board members and their therapist and their doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And he exposed them to the board because of everything I told him.
Yeah.
I told him everything that was happening to me. And he reported everything. And within like 2 or 3 weeks of me leaving, I didn't find this out till years later. But they got shut down. I think it was because of me and my dad. There may have been other things too, because I'm sure other people stepped forward after that.
Yeah.
I wasn't the only one being abused. So, plus I was bullied there. There were 3 kids in particular. I didn't know how to defend myself.
Yeah.
So they would all pick at me. I almost got in some fights too. But I wasn't a violent person back then, and I'm not now. But sometimes I would think about things that happen. Like, if I had the mind I have now, I could go back in time and relive those moments, still being in that body, but with the mind I have now, I could have done things so much differently. But of course, I wouldn't want to.
Yeah.
It's not about the trial; it's about what you learn about it. I learned a lot, but oftentimes you can't see what you learned 2 years later. Looking back through other trials that happened more recently, you can see a pattern.
Oh yeah. Yeah, pattern detection and stuff. Yeah, makes sense.
But a lot of people don't do that.
Yeah.
All they see is the pain they're going through, not the result of how it might help others if they get through it. Because ultimately, those things are a testimony that you can use. Because you can say, God got me through it.
Yeah.
And that's what I do. Like say, I lived through this pain and I survived it. It didn't kill me. So in a sense, the demons didn't win.
Yeah.
I mean, if you really need to throw in,
I just hope I can help other people see that.
Yeah. So anyway, you want to stop now?
Sure. That was a good one too.